All right, let's now speak to Artisanal Mining Expert Kgothatso Nhlengetwa. Kgothatso, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. So this latest call now by experts for complete shutdown of disused mines is actually not a new conversation or request, right? According to the Minerals Act of 1991, this has been part of the prospecting contract, but we know that in South Africa, mines have been getting away with the non-enforcement of this very important clause. What do you say?
Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your viewers. Yes, one of the most important things is that mines are actually supposed to have in their environmental and management plan how they're going to shut down and remediate before they even get their mining right. So especially when it comes to large-scale miners, who are the culprits in this case, they're supposed to shut down, close their mines, and make sure they're sealed. Now, the problem is that there's no real implication on who is supposed to make sure that once they are sealed, they stay sealed, because the DMRE does not necessarily have the capacity to ensure that they can monitor and evaluate whether or not these disused mines and ownerless mines and derelict mines stay in the state in which they can be sealed off from Zama mining. But at the same time, the large-scale industrial miners are saying, hey, we've done our job and we've sealed, so there's nothing else for us to do.
Interesting points that you raise there, Kgothatso, especially pertaining to DMRE, because for experts to now be reiterating the need for this enforcement, really, it's government that needs to ensure compliance with a clear framework of penalties in case of any defaulters. But who should then, do you think, bear the complete brunt of this responsibility? So as we are not confronted with a similar situation where law enforcement has to chart unfamiliar terrain, like doing mine rescue?
You know, it actually falls in the arms of the Department of Mineral Resources and Energy, because they are the regulator of the mining industry, and they're also supposed to ensure that any form of penalties and any form of punitive measures are supposed to be enforced on those that are disregarding the law in relation to the MPRTA or the Mineral, Petroleum and Resources Development Act. But then they cannot do this alone. They're supposed to do this alongside the enforcement hand, which are your SABC and which is in worst case scenario, which would be the South African Army.
Kgothatso, now, as an expert in this field, and you understand the actual processes that are actually involved, from blasting to extraction of whatever minerals are in those mines, it's obviously a lot more complicated than just putting up a concrete slab at the end of a mining project. So let's talk more about what this would actually involve, the entire process, and what type of additional cost do you think the mine owners would then have to incur if this is not already negotiated as part of the initial mining contract?
So there's two main aspects to rehabilitation or to mine closure. The first aspect is you have to ensure that you have these mining pillars that ensure that you don't have sinkholes, which is what the Zama miners actually go and mine. And you have to make sure in some instances that you have backfill so that there's no fall of ground or sinkholes that happens. Then second of all, you're supposed to seal off in a manner that cannot be then again opened. And that is the problem, is that it doesn't happen in a manner that cannot then be opened again. Usually the type of sealing off that is done is easily accessible and can be easily opened just by hammering or drilling by these Zama mining syndicates. So the question then becomes is that what does the DMRE do if there is no plan in place? If there is no plan in place, first of all, a mining right shouldn't be given. And second of all, if a mining right is given and then the mine doesn't then follow through on what the environmental management plan had said they would do, there should be punitive measures that take place. The question is, why doesn't DMRE enforce these laws? And that is a question that cannot be answered, because that takes political will to do so.
Interesting indeed. Now, Kgothatso, you mentioned a very interesting aspect here. We always mention rehabilitation or the complete closure of those mines, but I don't think anybody has ever explored what we're talking about when we talk about rehabilitation and the process that is involved in rehabilitating a mine. So maybe talk to us about this and what are the possible ways in which can be explored in terms of rehabilitation, because we've seen some disused quarries that are often part of the mine that have actually claimed a lot of people's lives just because, well, the mine prospectors just picked up and packed up at the end of business and never shut down anything, leaving the community to bear the brunt.
Yeah, so one of the ways which these, especially these gold underground mines that have been disused or ownerless or derelict, one of the ways they're supposed to rehabilitate is they're supposed to leave the land the same as which they found it. So one of the things that they're supposed to do in a technical mining term is called backfill. With backfill, what they do is they take some of the soil that they've removed from the ground and they put it back into the hole that they've made so that nobody can then go back into these emptied out areas, and that there's no fall of ground or sinkholes, as we can commonly call it. So that's one of the ways. The second way is that some of these mine dumps that we see, they're supposed to be rehabilitated. You should actually find that there's been vegetation planted on them. They should be removed of toxic minerals, and they should have vegetation that is replanted on them so that they can become viable soil again. But these two things are two simple things that are not currently being done by large-scale mines, especially those that have already left the area. Because as we know, from about the 1990s already, mines have been absconding the general gold underground mine sector.
So really the onus, you're saying, Kgothatso, needs to rest with the DMRE to enforce their own legislation, which is to hold these mines accountable for rehabilitation as well as closure of mines after prospecting.
Definitely. As the regulator, it is their mandate to do so. And if they say they don't have capacity, they have multiple organizations they can work with. They can work with the Minerals Council, they can work with CSIR, they can work with the Council for Geosciences, they can work with Mintech. There are many different avenues which they can work with in order to help them, to capacitate them, in order to curb the scourge of not proper mine closure and of illegal mining.
Thank you so much for your valuable input this afternoon, Ms. Kgothatso Nhlengetwa, there, an artisanal mining expert on safety concerns of those disused mines.